My sister's voice sliced through the room like a blade. You ruin everything, she said, adjusting her ring light as if I had walked in just to sabotage her live stream. My parents didn't even blink. Mom straightened her skirt like she was about to say something wise. She's not wrong, she said instead. You've ruined her life. You've ruined ours. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just packed a bag and left like someone who's done it before. You wouldn't believe what they planned after that. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I was halfway through reheating a cup of tea when my sister's voice sliced through the living room like a blade. You ruin everything, she snapped, adjusting the ring light so it framed her face like a halo. She was live streaming again, some milestone about hitting 50,000 followers, the kind of thing that made my parents beam like she'd cured cancer. I stood in the shadow of the kitchen, still invisible. She didn't have to call me out by name. She never did. Not now, she hissed, laptop glitching. Why does this always happen when you're around? My mother, always elegant, always neutral, stood up and brushed imaginary lint from her lap, like she was preparing to say something profound. She didn't. She just echoed the sentiment. She's not wrong, she said, with the icy calm of someone reciting a diagnosis. You stress people out, Odella. You've ruined her life. You've ruined ours. My father didn't speak. He rubbed the bridge of his nose like this was all too familiar. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I walked down the hallway toward the guest room, the one with the door that stuck, and the faint smell of mildew beneath the vanilla air freshener. I packed a backpack I hadn't touched in years. No photographs. No letters. I didn't leave a note. I closed the door behind me and stepped into the kind of night that swallows sound. At the gas station, under buzzing fluorescent lights, I bought a bottle of water and a granola bar out of habit, not hunger. The clerk said the last bus was due in 8 minutes. It was late, of course. I waited anyway. On the cold metal bench, I sat with my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, backpack between my feet like an anchor. When the bus arrived, I didn't look back. Downtown blurred past like wet paint. The driver didn't speak. No one did. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. I got off near a motel with flickering neon signage. Beige Square Anonymous. The man at the front desk didn't ask questions, just handed me a room key with the number scratched off and rewritten in marker. Cash or card, he mumbled without looking up. I handed over the last $42 in my wallet. The room smelled like old cigarettes and something sweeter trying to hide it. I sat on the bed still wearing my coat. I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling stain that looked like a broken heart depending on how you tilted your head. The silence wasn't comforting, it was accusatory. My phone, silent all night, vibrated once. A notification reminder. Unopened Mother's Day gift from Odella delivered 2 years ago. The one I saved for wrapped and shipped. Silk handkerchiefs monogrammed with her initials. Still unopened. Just like me. By morning, the sun hadn't finished rising. I counted what I had left: $270, 3 granola bars, no job, no place to go. But strangely, I didn't feel defeated. I felt free, like something had cracked and let air in. A small cafe near the bus depot opened early. Free Wi-Fi, the sign said. That was all I needed. I bought the cheapest coffee and took a seat near the outlet. I pulled up tutoring sites I hadn't used in years, updated my bio. Reliable. Patient, specializes in test prep, believes in showing up even when no one else does. By noon, I'd applied to 16 listings. That night, I returned to the motel and sat in the stillness organizing replies from students and parents. One teen messaged, "You're the first person who made math make sense." I smiled, quietly. And then something strange happened. I remembered a moment years ago standing beside my grandmother's chair at Sunday dinner. She was the only one who saw me. "You listen," she whispered once, like the world matters. She left me a letter when she passed, or so I was told. I only got one. A family friend had mentioned a second. I asked my mother about it. Her answer was clinical. Just old lady rambling. Nothing important. And that, I realized, was the story of me. A life of being edited out. cropped from photos, dismissed as too sensitive too much. But not anymore. The next morning, I received an email a Dallas-based tutoring agency liked my profile. They offered me a contract $75 per student. Enough to move out of the motel. Enough to breathe. I found a small room in a shared apartment. Not perfect, but it had a door that locked. One night, scrolling through Instagram, I saw a family photo on Seraphine's feed. New couch, new dog, same hallway, but no trace of me. Not even in the background. I wasn't sad. I was clear. Then came the email. Seraphine's PR pitch. A podcast opportunity about resilience and family dynamics. In the pitch she wrote, "My sister is emotionally unstable. We don't speak. It's better that way." My name wasn't mentioned, but I was there in every lie she typed. I printed that email and taped it beside the unopened letter from Grandma. Two kinds of silence. One that protected me, one that erased me. And then came the real blow. My former friend Mila knocked on my door. She held an envelope. My handwriting stared back at me. The birthday card I'd sent my mother last year unopened. Inside a letter about healing, about starting over. She never opened it. But that wasn't all Mila brought. She had screenshots of Seraphine's new online academy, the color scheme, the lesson plans, the diagrams. All mine, down to the phrasing. "She said you gave it to her," Mila whispered. But I knew that was a lie. I didn't cry. I printed everything. And that's when I remembered something years ago. I had uploaded a scan of Grandma's will. I found it. Right there in her handwriting, all curriculum materials and intellectual property, co-developed with Odella, shall remain hers exclusively. They erased me. But she made me permanent. The next knock wasn't Mila. It was my parents, and Seraphine. Their faces were strained makeup, fading dignity cracking. "We made mistakes," my mother said. I didn't argue. I didn't invite them in. "I'm not your fixer," I said, and closed the door. That's when it started. Copyright claims. My materials flagged. Anonymously, of course. But my lawyer traced it back to Seraphine's branding agency. They were trying to erase me again. But this time I had documentation. Receipts, timestamps, voice. I recorded a video. No music, no filters. Just me and the truth. I showed Grandma's will. My drafts. My designs. "Silence is strength," I said, but truth needs a voice. The internet believed me. Former students spoke up. Parents reposted. Even Reddit turned on her. Her intern leaked everything: design files, Canva templates, notes in my handwriting. It spread. And then the final move. A settlement offer. Confidentiality. Money. Rights restored if I stayed quiet. I read it once. Then again. And then I shredded it. Instead, I posted one final note. A still image, my name, my credentials. And this line, "You don't owe silence just because they share your last name." It went viral. Women messaged me from everywhere. Daughters, educators, sisters, strangers. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." In my small office, I hung Grandma's note, "You will build what no one sees today," next to the legal letter affirming ownership. The desk is small. The view is of a bus stop. But it's mine. I haven't heard from them since. Not when Seraphine's site was shut down. Not when they sold the house. But I didn't wait for apologies. I built a scholarship fund in Grandma's name. Quiet. Steady. One student sent a note. "You were the first person who said I could do it." I sat with that letter not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Last week I printed a copy of Grandma's quote. I mailed it anonymously to a student who told me once her family said she was too loud too much. Maybe one day she'll need those words in a motel room of her own. Maybe they'll remind her she's not invisible. Maybe she'll choose to build anyway. I didn't plan to revisit that inbox, not after everything had been said. But late one Tuesday night, while the world slept and the radiator hissed against the chill of early spring, I logged into the email account I used during my early tutoring days. I wasn't looking for anything, maybe just chasing closure the way a tongue chases a sore tooth. And there it was, a message from 6 months ago, never opened. Subject Voices of Impact. Nomination confirmed. I clicked. Dear Odella Shipley, you've been nominated for our annual Voices of Impact series, recognizing educators who've changed lives through resilience, integrity, and innovation. Your former students submitted your name with letters of support. We'd love to feature you. I sat back hand frozen on the trackpad. It felt unreal, like the universe had quietly whispered I saw you, even when they didn't. Attached were scanned testimonials, some from students I remembered vividly: Riley, Theo, Alondra, and one from a parent whose voice I could still hear trembling on a late-night call the day before her son's final SAT attempt. She didn't just tutor my child, she restored his confidence. There was something so heartbreakingly simple in those words. No ceremony, just truth. It didn't come with a check, or a post with thousands of likes, but it was something my mother had never said, something Seraphine could never steal. I closed the laptop gently, as if sealing that moment in amber. The next morning I emailed the organizer back. A quiet yes. No request for accolades, just permission to let others speak. A week later, a box arrived. Inside a plaque, a handwritten note from the event coordinator, and a small lapel pin shaped like a lighthouse. For those who've guided others without needing to be seen. I stared at that pin for a long time. That same afternoon, my landlord knocked. There's someone downstairs asking for you. Says she's your cousin. I didn't have a cousin in this city. I walked down, cautious shoulders squared in the way survivors carry themselves, not afraid, just prepared. She stood there in a red coat, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. Odell, she said. It's me. Tamsin. From back when we were kids. I blinked. Tamsin had been the only cousin I truly liked, the only one who didn't call me background noise at family reunions. We lost touch after her mom remarried and moved to Oregon. She looked older now, but not unfamiliar. She held out a manila envelope. I didn't know, she said softly. What they did, what they said about you. I thought you just disappeared. I took the envelope warily. Why, now I saw the video, she said. And I remembered this. She tapped the envelope. Grandma gave it to my mom for safekeeping. Said it was for Odella if things ever went wrong. But I think Mom forgot. Or chose to forget. Inside were several pages in my grandmother's neat cursive. Another letter written long before she passed. Odell, I know this family has sharp edges. If you're reading this, it means those edges finally drew blood. You were always the one who saw what others missed. The one who kept listening long after the rest stopped caring. That will be your strength, but it will also make you lonely. Don't let them convince you that silence means you were wrong. I stopped reading. My chest ached, not in the dramatic TV movie kind of way, but the kind that feels like a slow unraveling from the inside. Tamsin watched me with eyes that didn't flinch. I have a copy if you want to keep that one safe. I nodded, unable to speak. Later that night, I added it to the wall. Besides the email, the legal clause, the tutoring note, my quiet evidence of existence. I didn't need to go back to them. They were coming to me now. A few days later, Margot the lawyer called. Are you sitting? She asked. Her voice had a smile behind it. Not yet, I said, sliding onto the couch. Two things, she said. One, the copyright claim has been formally dismissed. Platform reinstated. Your site is back up and fully protected under the IP clause. I exhaled. And two, she chuckled. The Success Academy, Seraphine's brand. She's received 3 cease and desist notices from independent content creators she lifted materials from. I blinked. So she didn't just steal from me. Nope, Margot said. Seems she had a habit of borrowing brilliance. You were just the only one who documented everything. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt confirmed, like the world had finally put the pieces in the right order. After we hung up, I went to the window. Rain tapped against the glass, soft and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't dread what would come next. I sat down and drafted a message not to my family, but to my students. A short update from Miss Shipley. I'm back. Fully licensed, fully legal, and deeply grateful. Thank you for standing by me when I had no platform but my voice. That night, my inbox overflowed, not with drama, but with loyalty. Parents, students, a principal from a school I once volunteered at messaged me, "We're developing a remote mentorship program. Want in?" I wrote back, "Yes." The next week, I launched the Quiet Voices curriculum. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have polished branding or expensive graphics, but it had something better: truth. And then came the newspaper. A journalist reached out. Someone who had followed the viral thread, my quiet video, the takedown of Seraphine's brand. "We'd like to feature you," she said. "Not as the victim, as the rebuilder." I hesitated. "Do I need to talk about them?" I asked. "Only if you want to," she said. So I agreed. We met in a bookstore cafe on the east side of town. She asked smart questions. Not invasive, not sensational, just clear, focused, respectful. When the article was published, the headline was simple: "The Woman Who Reclaimed Her Name." Underneath a photo of me in front of my apartment window, the lighthouse pin gleamed on my collar. My mother never called, my father didn't write, but I heard from someone else, the intern. She DM'd me late one night. Apologized for scrubbing my name, said she had bills to pay and fear made her blind. "I watched you speak," she wrote. "You didn't raise your voice, but you still shattered the silence. Thank you." I didn't reply, not out of spite but because some moments deserve to remain whole. A period, not a comma. Months passed. The scholarship fund grew slowly. Small donations, local support. One student wrote to say she used the money to buy her first laptop. "I named it Miss S," she said. "Hope you don't mind." I laughed harder than I had in months. Then came a message I didn't expect. From a woman named Judith, in her 60s, a retired librarian. "I saw your story," she wrote. "I was erased too, for being the wrong daughter. Would you ever consider speaking at our women's collective?" I did. That night, in a quiet room of folding chairs and old tile floors, I stood in front of a dozen women with different faces, but the same story told: to shrink to silence, to vanish. I told them what I'd learned: that justice isn't always loud, that healing isn't applause, that sometimes survival is the most radical act of all. They didn't clap wildly, they didn't cry, they nodded, and that was more than enough. As I walked out of the building, a young girl sat on the steps, maybe 15, holding a notebook to her chest. She didn't say anything, just handed me a folded note. Inside, 4 words written in ink that bled slightly on the edges: "I won't disappear either." The note from the girl stayed in my pocket for days. I didn't unfold it again, I didn't need to. Those 4 words had already carved a space into my ribs. I won't disappear either. They echoed softly whenever I passed a mirror, or opened my laptop, or taught a student how to thread clarity through an essay. I had been quietly rebuilding brick by quiet brick. But that note reminded me why the foundation mattered, why I kept everything documented, notarized, and legally anchored. Not for revenge, for permanence. One morning, while reviewing lesson plans, I got a calendar ping I'd forgotten about: Scholarship Advisory Board meeting, 3 p.m. I'd agreed to serve on the board of a local initiative supporting low-income students who'd been denied college counseling. Mostly girls, mostly invisible, mostly familiar. When I arrived at the community center, the folding chairs were already set up in a semicircle, and a girl with nervous eyes was reading a poem aloud. I slipped into the back row unseen. Her voice shook on every third word but didn't stop. "If I vanish, let it be because I chose the sky." That line gripped my chest. After the meeting, the director approached me. "She's one of yours," she said quietly. "Riley, the girl you helped last year." I hadn't recognized her. Taller now. More sure. She was applying to a creative writing program out of state. "She talks about you like you're a lighthouse." The director smiled. "Says you didn't just teach her grammar, you gave her permission." I didn't know what to say to that. But I nodded, and I felt it, deep in the place that used to ache for recognition. That night, I finally allowed myself to write something I hadn't in years, a speech. Not for publication, not for social media, just for me. It started with a question I once asked in silence. What do you do when the people who raised you are also the ones who erased you? The answer, it turned out, was simple. You write yourself back in. I called the file inheritance. Not the kind measured in bank accounts or heirlooms, but the kind made of intention, of paper trails of memory turned into truth. I started drafting a workshop around it, recovering the erased self, a blend of personal narrative, legal tools, and educational strategy. How to document your work, how to guard your ideas, how to protect your voice even when the people closest to you want to mute it. Within 2 weeks, I had a full outline. I pitched it to a nonprofit that supported survivors of emotional abuse and family estrangement. They responded in less than 24 hours. We've never seen anything like this, the director wrote. It's not just a workshop, it's a blueprint. That same week, a message popped up on my business site's contact form. No sender name, just, are you going to keep pretending we didn't matter? No signature. No IP address traceable through the platform. But I knew that voice. The guilt poses as a question. The attempt to rope me back into old roles. I didn't answer. Instead, I scheduled the first Recovering the Erased Self workshop for the following month. I rented a small co-working space downtown. 12 chairs, a whiteboard, a stack of spiral notebooks. On the door, I posted a single line, "You are not required to apologize for your survival." 10 women showed up. 3 of them brought tears. All of them brought silence that had calcified into shame. I started the session not with a story, but with a question. When did you first feel invisible? We went around the room. The answers didn't surprise me, but they shook me anyway. When I wasn't invited to my graduation dinner. When my mother gave my diary to my sister because she said it had better stories. When my dad told me, "You're too intense, nobody likes intensity." I didn't try to fix their pain. I validated it. I gave them a pen and a printed copy of my old curriculum diagrams marked "Property of Odella Shipley." I told them what I wish someone had told me at 22, keep your name on your work. Keep your proof. Keep your story from being ghostwritten by someone else. When the session ended, no one clapped, but they lingered, asking if they could return, if I'd teach it again, if I'd make it digital. I said yes. That night, while brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed again. A text this time. From a number not saved in my contacts. It didn't have to be this way. You made it worse. You always do. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it hurt, because it was so predictable. Like a dog returning to an old wound it didn't understand. I didn't reply. I blocked the number. 3 days later, an email landed in my inbox. From an address tied to a university I didn't recognize. A professor of media studies had seen my video and wanted to include it in a lecture series on digital truth and public reclamation. He called it The Ethics of Narrative Ownership. Would I consent? I sat with that email all morning. Then I replied, I consent. As long as the story is told in full and not sanitized to make the wrong people comfortable. He agreed. A week later, the lecture was uploaded. My face appeared on a projector screen in a college auditorium. The professor began with this sentence, "History has never been fair to the quiet ones, until now." The comments below were full of students who said, "That's my mom," or "That's me." One wrote, "I didn't know we were allowed to call it erasure." I messaged her privately, "You are." The next weekend, while organizing some documents in my file cabinet, I found a sealed envelope buried between expired coupons and old utility bills. My handwriting, faded ink. I'd addressed it years ago. To myself when the silence is too loud. I must have written it during one of the motel nights. I opened it slowly, like unfolding a scar. Odella. If you've made it here, you're still standing. That's enough. You don't owe anyone performance. You don't owe them your healing process. Let it be messy. Let it be quiet. Just let it be yours. I folded the letter back and placed it next to Grandma's will in the fireproof box I now kept under my bed. Then came the call. A different number. Unfamiliar. But something in my gut made me answer. Miss Shipley. The voice was soft, southern, nervous. Yes, my name is Annalise. I was one of the assistants for Seraphine. I don't work there anymore. I stayed silent. I saw everything. The messages, the rebranding files, the curriculum slides. I didn't know who to believe at first. But your video, it was calm. Too calm to be a lie. She paused. I know this probably doesn't matter now, but I saved copies. Of everything. Just in case. My heart didn't race. It settled. I can send them to you, she said. Or your lawyer, if you want. I thanked her. Gave her Margot's contact. We ended the call without drama. That night I lit a small candle by the window. I didn't pray. I didn't hope for revenge. I just watched the flame until it danced itself into stillness. By the end of the month, Recovering the Erased Self was booked out 3 sessions ahead. I added a second evening slot, a third weekend one. I started bringing in guest speakers, women who'd survived silencing sons who'd been cut from wills for saying no queer youth who'd rewritten their family names. Each time I opened the workshop, I started with the same phrase. This is not about who hurt you. It's about who you became despite it. One night, as I packed up, an older woman approached me. White hair, pinned back shoes worn from years. You remind me of my daughter, she said. Except, she never got to speak. I felt the air shift between us. Thank you, she whispered, for naming what we never could. After she left, I sat in the empty room, surrounded by folding chairs and the scent of old linoleum. I pulled out my phone and opened the unsent letters folder I'd once created in my lowest motel days. Letter after letter to people who never responded. My mother, my sister, myself. I selected all and hit archive, not delete, because the past doesn't vanish, but it also doesn't get to dictate the next page. I thought I'd buried the urge to explain myself, to reach for validation from people who made it clear they preferred a version of me they could edit. But something shifted again when I received a letter, not digital, not anonymous, but real. Postmarked from Greensboro, North Carolina. Handwritten address. No return name. Just a faint scent of lavender through the envelope glue. I sat with it for nearly 2 hours before opening it. I told myself it could be anything, an old student, a workshop participant. But my chest already knew. It was Verena. Odella. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to finish this letter. But I owe you a full sentence at least once in your life. I was wrong. I paused, letting that line stretch out across my apartment like a draft from an open window. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it wasn't silence either. She continued, You were always different. Quiet, intentional. And I didn't know what to do with that. Your sister was easier to flatter, easier to center. I'm not excusing myself, just explaining my failure in the language I never gave you before. I read the letter twice. She mentioned Grandma, briefly. Said she found one of her old recipe cards tucked into the back of a drawer and thought of me. Of how I used to sit on the floor and recite the ingredients aloud like spells. Said she missed that. She didn't ask me to call. Didn't beg for repair, and I was grateful for that. For once, it wasn't about a mess she needed me to mop up. I placed the letter in the same fireproof box as everything else that mattered, not because I forgave her, but because some words belong to the archive of survival. The next day, I had a full workshop. 6 new attendees, one woman in her 20s freshly cut off from her family after coming out. Another in her 50s divorced after decades of quiet compliance, her words. One teenager whose parents had left her behind when they moved to another state, taking her siblings but not her. I listened. I taught. I stayed present. but the letter echoed behind my ribs all day, like a low humming note I couldn't place. That night, after everyone had gone, I stood in the middle of the empty room and whispered the phrase I had waited my whole life to hear. You were right to leave. Not you were brave, not you were misunderstood. Just, you were right. I thought of all the years I spent trying to soften myself so they'd call me back to the table. But maybe I wasn't meant to sit at that one. Maybe I was meant to build my own. A week later, Margot called again. You've been named in a new feature, she said. Not litigation. Media. I froze. Who? She chuckled. Forbes. They're running a piece on micro-educational entrepreneurs. Someone nominated you. I blinked. That's real? She sent me the link. There I was. Photo credentials, curriculum name, and a headline that read, The Educator Who Took the Long Way Home and Turned It into a Roadmap. The article didn't mention my family. It didn't need to. It focused on the work, the workshops, the students. The movement had grown quietly under the radar. One paragraph near the end quoted a parent. My daughter believes in herself now. Odella didn't just teach her, she translated her. I set the article aside and looked at the wall where all my quiet evidence lived. The email, the will, the unopened birthday card, the note from Grandma, the text from Riley, the quote from the young girl on the steps, the rejection, the erasure, the return. And I realized something. They never broke me. They paused me, but they never erased what mattered. My work, my name, my intent. That night I revised the scholarship's mission statement. Before it had read for students who've been overlooked but still show up. Now it reads, for those who were left out, talked over, or made small and still chose to speak. I launched a second round of scholarships. This time I opened submissions to educators too, tutors, counselors, coaches, anyone doing the quiet work behind the curtain. I knew them. I had been them. I still was. 3 days after that, a familiar name popped up on a local event flyer. Seraphine, a community panel on digital entrepreneurship. She was scheduled to speak. At first I laughed, the kind that doesn't make it to your throat. Then I got quiet. I didn't want revenge, not anymore. But I wanted presence, so I went. I bought a single ticket, arrived early, took a seat in the third row, not hidden, not confrontational, just there. When she walked on stage, her posture faltered. Just for a second. A flicker of recognition. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I just looked. The moderator asked about her brand, her journey, her challenges. She answered smoothly, professionally, and polished. And then came the question, what do you think is the most important thing for young women building their platform? She hesitated, then said, know what's yours, document it, protect it. People will try to rewrite your name onto work that isn't theirs. She didn't look at me when she said it, but I didn't need her to, because the truth has a funny way of echoing, especially when spoken by someone who once buried it. After the event, I left without saying a word, but that night an email landed in my inbox. Subject: I know I don't deserve a reply. It was short. You were always better at this. I just thought if I were louder, I'd win. But all I did was lose myself. You taught them. I copied you. And I hate that it took me this long to see it. There was no attachment, no ask, no links, just a sentence. I won't erase you again. I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box. Then I closed the tab. Not out of malice, out of peace. Because sometimes the only way to truly heal is to let the apology stay suspended, uncached. You don't need to reply to the truth once you've already lived it. The next morning, I stood at the bus stop with a thermos in hand. Across the street, a teenage girl was reciting vocabulary words into her phone. She was pacing focused, unaware that anyone was watching. When she looked up, she caught my eye. I smiled. She nodded just once. That was enough. I arrived at the community center and unlocked the classroom. On the whiteboard, someone had written in tiny, blocky handwriting, Thank you for noticing me before I knew how to ask. I didn't erase it, I underlined it. Then I turned on the lights and began preparing the room. 12 chairs, 3 handouts, a new notebook, and at the top of every page, your story is not inconvenient. It's evidence. The morning the foundation was finalized, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I didn't gather people in a room for speeches or applause. I opened the window of my modest apartment, let the breeze wash over my face, and whispered, "Thank you to the air." The Quiet Builders Foundation. Registered, funded, operational. It wasn't named after me. That was deliberate. The point was never recognition. It was a replication. I wanted girls like the one I used to be sitting in a silent kitchen while someone else got the praise, holding unopened letters and soft grief, to know there was a place carved with their name in mind. The foundation's first act was awarding grants to 4 students and 2 early career tutors. One of them, an immigrant from Ghana named Amma, called me crying. "I thought people like me were invisible," she said through the phone, her voice cracking. "You saw me. I was you," I told her gently. "And I promise you, you are not invisible." Later that night, I made tea and sat by my bookshelf. I took down a small photo, one of the only ones I kept. It was me, age 11, holding up a reading trophy. My father's hand was on my shoulder, my mother's polite smile hovering behind me, and Seraphine was already stealing attention from the side, waving to someone just out of frame. I looked at that small version of me, eyes wide, awkward posture, and hand gripping the certificate too tightly. She didn't know yet. She didn't know about the years ahead. The edits, the omissions, the door that would one day be shut in her face. But she also didn't know that she'd build a new one. I placed the photo back and glanced at my wall of evidence, faded now, curling at the corners but still standing, not out of spite, out of memory. Proof of the path, not the pain. My phone buzzed. It was a message from a high school counselor I'd partnered with in Tennessee. She sent me a picture, 3 students sitting cross-legged on a gym floor, laptops open, beaming at the camera. "We used your lesson plan today. They loved it." One of them said, "I've never felt this smart before." I stared at that line. I've never felt this smart before. It was never about revenge. It was never about undoing the harm. It was about building something the harm couldn't touch. I closed my eyes and thought of Grandma, of her letters, her scribbled recipes, her quiet, steady love, the kind that never made noise but still left roots. She never lived long enough to see the battle. But she anticipated it, prepared for it, protected me when no one else did. The legal clause in her will hadn't just saved my work, it had saved my name. It was her way of whispering through time, "You matter more than they know. Don't let them take you from yourself." I thought about sending another letter to my mother, to Verena. Maybe just a photo of the foundation certificate, maybe a printout of the Forbes article. But I stopped myself. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I didn't need her to know anymore. I didn't need her to see it to believe it was real. I knew. And sometimes knowing is louder than applause. Weeks passed and the world spun on without drama. No scandal, no more anonymous emails, just a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with strong coffee and sunlight slipping through half-open blinds. Afternoons were filled with Zoom calls, syllabi edits, and the steady click of keys as I fine-tuned lesson modules for the next cohort of Quiet Builders grantees. The work was slow, beautiful, untelevised. One Saturday morning, as I was leaving the community center, a girl about 16 stopped me at the door. Her hair was in a loose braid, her shoes scuffed from use, and her voice barely carried. "Ms. Shipley," she said, holding out a folded notebook paper. "You don't have to read it now. I didn't ask what it was." I just nodded and tucked it into my coat pocket. Later in my apartment, I unfolded it like it was something sacred. It wasn't long. 3 paragraphs written in pencil with shaky lines, but the last sentence stopped me. "You didn't change my life. You gave it back to me." I closed my eyes, pressed the note to my chest. There was no joy like this, no trophy, no article, no apology could ever match it. Later that week, I was invited to a panel at a nearby university. The email was formal, but the professor's note made me smile. We're teaching a class on voice reclamation. One of our students cited your workshop video as their turning point. Would you consider being our closing speaker? I agreed. On the day of the event, I wore a navy blazer and my grandmother's brooch, small, delicate, unassuming like her. The auditorium wasn't full, but it didn't matter. I stood at the podium and spoke not as someone who won, but as someone who withstood. I used to think legacy meant being remembered, I said. Now I know it means making sure others remember themselves. When it ended, no one rushed to congratulate me. A few students lingered. One handed me a sticky note folded like origami. Another asked if I had a copy of my curriculum that they could adapt for their capstone. But one girl waited until the crowd had thinned. She stood alone at the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes cautious. She approached slowly. "I'm her niece," she said. "Seraphine's." I blinked. She doesn't know I'm here. She wouldn't approve, but I needed to see. I said nothing. Let her fill the silence. "She talks about you like a ghost," the girl said. "But you're not. You're real. You built something real." I could feel the knot behind my sternum pull tight, then slowly release. "I just wanted you to know," she said. "I'm not going to be like them." She turned before I could speak and disappeared into the hall. I didn't follow. Instead, I sat in the last row of the auditorium and looked out at the empty chairs. I imagined the voices they'd held, the fears they'd absorbed, the truths they'd made room for. Then I stood up and left. The next morning, I found an envelope slid under the door of the community center. Inside, a donation check. No signature, no note. Just one sentence typed in 12-point font. For the girl who remembered how to stay. I never found out who sent it. But I deposited it anyway. Used it to fund laptops for the next grant cycle. By then, the foundation had reached 10 states, then 15, then 30. And I stayed behind the scenes. No interviews, no Meet the Founder videos, just steady architecture. One day, I received a letter in the mail, not from anyone I knew. It was from a woman incarcerated in a correctional education facility in the Midwest. She had been forwarded one of my workshop transcripts. "I don't get visitors. I don't expect to ever leave here. But I read what you said, and for the first time in years, I wrote something. Not to ask for anything. Just to say thank you for reminding me that I still exist." I printed it, framed it, hung it right above my desk. Not as decoration, as a compass. There are days I still feel the old ache, the residue of erasure. Like when I catch my reflection in a storefront window and for a split second brace for the voice that used to say, "You take up too much space." But then I remember that voice was never mine. I made room for new ones now. Like the second grader from Minneapolis who sent a drawing of a classroom with Miss O written in crayon above the chalkboard. Or the teenage boy in Arizona who emailed me after finishing my module and said my dad always said I was dumb, but now I know he was just wrong. Those are the voices that built me back, brick by brick, word by word. One late evening, I stood by my window and watched the sky turn that impossible shade of blue that only shows up between sunset and nightfall. I thought about writing again. Not curriculum, not workshops, just something for me. A collection, maybe. Letters to the girl I used to be. The one who stayed silent for so long. The one who waited for permission. The one who kept her voice folded inside an apology. I opened a new document. Typed the title, "What I Know Now." Then I wrote the first line. "They never saw you, but you are not invisible." And finally, after all these years, I believed it. Not in my mind, but in my bones. I looked around the room, at the soft light, the worn couch, the framed letter from the woman behind bars. The old bookshelf was stacked with stories that once felt too far from mine. And I whispered into the silence, not for applause, not for validation, just for myself. I'm here. I was always here. And I'm never disappearing again. If you've ever felt erased, if you've ever rebuilt yourself from the ground up, this space was made for you. Don't leave quietly. Tap the next video in the playlist, subscribe to Shadowed Revenge for more stories of strength reclaimed, and drop a comment sharing one line you wish someone had told you. Thank you for walking every step of this journey. May your voice be steady, your memory whole, and your future entirely your own.